What's up, everybody? I'm Joe, I'm a recovered alcoholic. Grateful to be here. Dano, thanks for inviting me out. It's an honor and a privilege. My vein actually popped when that happened, too. It was a hell of an experience. But it wasn't only the way he was talking about that experience. He came into that treatment center with a message of hope, you know. And I was at like the I don't know, I've been at worse bottoms, I've been homeless, living on the streets, all that, but I was on my second relapse, looking at 15 years in jail, like, what am I gonna do? I can't stay sober in rehab. And Dano came in with a message of hope, and he got up in front of the room and he shared a powerful message about how the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and the power of God changed his life, And I say it all the time, if he would have came into that rehab and shared his drunkalog and his ex-girlfriends and where he worked and left, I'd still be drinking or I'd be dead today, So I'm grateful, eternally grateful for that. My home group is a group called All It Up Again. We meet in Baldwin, New York. We're an enthusiastic group, and we have some strong belief systems over there. Oh, shit, dude, was that me? Yeah, right? Knock the sign off. We have an enthusiastic group over there, which is not common in my area. We have strong belief systems, about the recovery process being the solution, and that's not so common where I come from, and I love my home group. Rosario, thanks for coming out with me. He's a member of my home group. Awesome guy. We've been having an awesome time. And I'm grateful. I am very grateful to be here to talk on the fourth step. I have a sponsor. His name is Devin C. from Brooklyn, and I'm currently going through the steps with a guy named Chad P. And not because I like going through the steps, guys. I want you to know that, all right? It's literally just because I fall asleep to this stuff, That is totally my experience. I start falling asleep. I'm sponsoring guys. I'm thinking I'm doing everything, and I start sleepwalking, And, I'm going through the steps now. It's a totally new experience. I'm reading the set-aside prayer and just going through the book kind of by myself with an open mind rather than someone guiding me through it. And I'm going through the book currently, and in the first couple chapters, what popped out to me was like 130 questions that are current questions, and it's been waking me up a little bit, One of the questions that the guy I'm working with asked me is like, do you believe you're powerless? Right? And then the question he followed up with, does your actions reflect that? And that was very moving for me, because I've been getting a lot of guys currently that are coming to me with 5-10 years sober, and they're sick, and they just cheated on their wife, ruined their life, burned it to the ground. And when I start talking to them, I ask them, do you believe you're powerless? Are you doing everything in Alcoholics Anonymous, is what I ask them. Unanimously, the answer is yes. And then we get into it, and I ask them, do you believe you're powerless? Do your actions reflect that? And when we start talking and having a conversation, they start telling me, yeah, I have no 10-step life, right? I'm not doing On Awakening, I got one sponsee, I'm working 80 hours, and the delusion is I'm doing everything. The reality is I'm not barely doing anything, And that's what kind of happens to me. So that's why every year I get a new sponsor, go through the steps again. It's because I start falling asleep to this stuff. And this is what happened to me 15 months ago when I just had a baby boy. He's 15 months now. Most beautiful thing in the world. And I started loving this kid more than anything in my life, I wasn't planning on having kids, didn't want kids, had this kid and with my wife that I met in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I started loving this kid, and me and my wife were working opposite schedules, and I couldn't do as much as I was doing. I had 20 sponsees going to meetings every day. Now I have a couple guys, I'm going to one meeting, and I start believing the lie that my mind's telling me that I'm starting to feel spiritually sick because I can't go to sponsor 20 guys. I can't go to a meeting every day, and where I'm getting to is the inventory process, I need inventory to see the truth, There's a line in the doctor's opinion that says, after a time, I can't differentiate the truth from the false, And we're not talking about drunk. This is dead sober. I start believing the lie my mind tells me, I got into the inventory and started taking a look. I wrote an inventory. I use resentment inventory as inspiration a lot of times. I think the resentment was I can't do what I used to do, you know? And I wrote the inventory out, and in the fourth column where myself, I started seeing that I'm starting to fall asleep to this stuff. I'm not doing on awakening like I used to. There's no 10-step life in my life anymore. I'm getting angry. I'm not 10-stepping. I'm not watching my thought life. But this is what's scary is I believe that it's because I can't do all these things, you know. But it's really because I'm starting to slack on my spiritual life, right? There's the one time it says it's easy in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Where is it, right? It's easy to let up on the spiritual program and of action and rest on our laurels, right? That's my experience. They say it's easy. Why? Because it's fucking easy. I watch it all the time, you know? And it's a scary thing. And we had some amazing speakers on step 1 and step 2 and 3. It's been an awesome time. Everybody I met is awesome. I was so nervous about doing this. You know, I'm thinking about the talk before the talk and all that stuff. I could barely eat lunch, you know? I get nervous up here. I'm nervous all the time. I have a constant, nervous condition, you know? It's just generally there. But everybody's been so, I love the humanness about this stuff. You know, we're not claiming to be walking on spiritual clouds all the time, you know? And I can tell you, in my experience, it's me falling short that makes me useful, you know? Me sitting down with a sponsee and telling him how great I did today isn't helping him, you know? But talking about where I fell short, I did this, and this is how I outgrew that and learned from that, that's what makes me useful. And that's what I've been seeing this weekend, and it's a beautiful thing, you know? My sobriety date is April 30th, 2016, and I love Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, there's nothing I could ever say up here to justify how much love I have for Alcoholics Anonymous and the power of God. And I wasn't a big God guy. I didn't really, you know, I grew up with certain spiritual beliefs. I was religiously Jewish. I don't fucking like it, but, you know, my parents were very religious, and I grew up with the belief system that if I start, you know, that when you do things bad, you get punished, you know? So when I started doing punishable things, I turned my back on that belief kind of thing. But I was always kind of seeking, but it was always an idea, never an experience, you know? It was always what might be. I was looking out there like the last speaker was talking about, never anything I experienced in my heart. And I didn't believe it was real, you know? When I was reading with Dano, I didn't think anything was gonna change for me. I think I remember telling him, this ain't gonna work, you know? He's like, I don't care what you think, you know? Let's do this, you know? And I've exhausted every option. I tried it my way a million times. I learned how to do Alcoholics Anonymous a lot by doing it the other way, you know, by not doing it. But, you know, when it gets into the fourth step, it starts talking about, you know, next we launched. Anybody have a failure to launch in here? Yeah, it's an experience, right? I had a failure to launch many times, you know, and it was I think literally due to the fact that I had no clue what the hell was wrong with me. You know, I didn't understand what I suffered from for being in the rooms I was in the rooms for 6 years, constantly going to meetings, getting commitments. I remember Dano when we met and we sat down, we started reading, he opened up the book, went to the circle and triangle and smashed the delusion that I've ever tried Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I believed I was doing it. In the end of me coming around to going to meetings and relapse, and I used to go around telling people Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't work. I tried it, you know. Never went through the steps, never had an experience with the fourth step, never did anything, but I tried it, you know. And but it says, right, next we launched on a course of vigorous action, right? And for the first time when I was sitting down with him, I said this third step, I didn't really have an experience with it, you know? It was still just a belief what might be, nothing changed, you know? But he said something that did help me though when we were reading the promises that are by the third step. I don't know if you consider them the third step promises, but when it says we have a new employer, what do we do for him? You know, go help people. It was what came, you know? And I remember I had 90 days sober. I'm like, help people? What are you high? You know, I need help, you know? But what changed for me at that moment is I started walking around the rehab I was in and I was looking for people to help. I was cleaning the coffee bar, you know, doing all these weird stuff that I've never done before without a self-seeking motive, you know? But I don't know what was different this. I think just understanding my powerlessness, understanding that I was screwed and I'm going to drink no matter what, right? The promise of the first step is the time and place will come where I'm going to drink again, you know? And I can't do step 1 100%, you know? That's a big thing we say by me. Oh, do step 1 100%, you know? What step 1 tells me is I can't do it 100%. I'm going to believe the lie that I'm therefore non-alcoholic, you know, and pick up the first one again. I've watched it a million times. People that, you know, are big book thumpers and they believe the lie that they could smoke crack manageably, you know. I see it, you know, it's insane. But what I do know, what I need to do is seek power, right? That's my job here, is to get access to power. And so this fourth step stuff is very important. And with the guys I work with now, I try to get to the fourth step as quick as possible. I don't have time. you know? And I have a method that I use. I don't read line for line anymore. You know, that was foreign to me. I would never do that back in the day. That's hearsay, you know? But, you know, we get to the fourth step pretty quick with a full knowledge of my condition. And the guys I see that get to the fourth step quicker get through the fourth step, you know? But when I have 2 months and I'm getting to the fourth step, I got all this stuff back in my life, you know, all went well for a while, right? They were talking about, right? And so, you know, it's important for me to get to this fourth step quick. But so getting into the fourth step, you know, what I'm really looking at in this fourth step stuff is really how self shows up, you know, really how self shows up. We're seeing how self manifested in various ways was what had defeated us, right? We considered it as common manifestations, right? I had no clue. I thought alcohol was the problem for the longest time. And you know, we talked about selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of my troubles. And I'm going to see how it shows up in my life. And that's the point. And with the third step and seeing how I'm the actor trying to be the director, trying to run the whole show, all that stuff. I read it in the book. I didn't really see the truth in it. What helped me see the truth in it is the fourth and the fifth step, right? This is showing me how I created everything, right? How my problems come from me. Right, the book says, right? That my problems don't happen to me, they come from me, you know? And that's what the fourth step's gonna show me. And I remember I made a list, right? It says we make a list of people we were angry at. I think it's pretty important that it says were, in my experience. I get guys that come to me and they're like, I have 5 resentments. I forgive everybody. That's what I have forgiven everybody in my life. They believe that, but yet you put that person in front of them and they want to kill them, you know? So I say, the book says, we listed people we were angry at, past tense. Whether you believe that you forgive them or not, let's put them on paper and look at it, you know? I'm not looking at them in the end anyway. I'm seeing how I operate, how self-manifested, you know? And so the second column being why I'm angry. You know, and then the third column being the 7 areas of self, you know, how I'm hurt, threatened, or interferes. But I love the example. I'm going to read the first example. It says, I'm resentful at Mr. Brown, right? It says the cause. His attention to my wife. Told my wife of my mistress, Brown may get my job at the office, right? We've heard it a million times. It's a serious resentment, guys. You know, this stuff is eating him up. He wants to screw his wife, told his wife he was cheating, and then may get his job, you know? It does get bigger than that, but that's a big one, you know? But I love how they call it the cause, you know? And what it was explained to me is that the second column is the cause of this person's spiritual sickness, right? What the book does so masterly is it separates the human behavior from the human being, right? When I used to get angry, I could never separate human behavior from human being, right? I hated you for who you were, you know? But what the book starts to do, and it's going to talk about it in the fourth column, is like separating that. Like if this person wasn't spiritually sick, they would have never did what they did. And if they never did what they did, there would be no first column, right? Their name wouldn't be on the paper, right? That was revolutionary to me. I don't know about you guys, but it, you know, it changed the game for me. You know, and it says it affects my sex relations, self-esteem, sex relations, self-esteem. Well, I like to take a look at how sex relations, self-esteem were affected. I like taking a look at, you know, the extended third column on how, you know, my expectations and everything. I don't think it's always necessary. The first time I went through it, I had an experience completely not breaking down the third column, and that changed my life, you know. But now being sober a little bit, you know, for me, sometimes it's less about the fourth column, it's more about the third column. You know, why am I disturbable, right? And so, and if I'm still looking at it in those 3 columns, I'm still looking at how the people wronged me, right? The world and its people really wronged me, and that was my belief system. That is that I was the way I was because of everybody else, you know. That I believe that the world and its environment and the people around me made me think and feel a certain way. I had no clue that the way I was thinking and feeling was creating what I seen out there in the world. You know, it was foreign to me. But you know, it starts getting into, it says we saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how, right? We're going to look at this from an entirely different angle. And I love that. It says we're going to see how these resentments must be mastered, right? They're giving us a process to master resentments. Like that's what this resentment inventory is for. A lot by me, you'll see where people start getting resentful and they'll tell them, oh, just go pray for them. You know, it's a common thing by me. I'm not knocking it. Prayer works, you know. But those same people that are walking around the meetings praying for the other person are dying. You know, I'm watching them furious. Their veins are popping out of their necks, and they're praying. I'm praying for him. You know, I'm praying for my boss. He's an asshole, you know? And I'm praying from this position of I'm up here and they're down here, you know? Which is not what we're trying to get to here, you know? But I want to learn how to master resentments, right? And they give me this process. I've never had an experience where I wrote out a resentment inventory and read it with somebody and did not get free from the resentment, you know? No matter what it was. I had some serious resentments, you know? But it goes to say, it says, we realize that these people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick like ourselves, right? Like ourselves. That's the important part, right? And on the page before it says we went back through our lives. Right now, what I'm trying to do in this position is let me go back through their life. You know, let me put myself in their position. If I had the life they had and the mind they had, would I be susceptible of doing what they did? The answer is always yes. And I could go to the extreme examples. We're talking about rapist, pedophile, whatever it is. Think of the extreme. If I had the life they had, the mind they had, the childhood they had, the experiences they had, I would not be able to not do what they did, you know, which is powerful, right? This inventory process cracked me open. It cracked me open. It gave me compassion I've never had before. It gave me freedom I never thought was available, you know, just by looking at this from a different angle and really like, you know, writing this stuff out and taking a look at it, you know, and then it gets into the resentment prayer. And I'm not praying for myself in this resentment prayer. I'm asking for a different view on this, right? Let me see this person like he's sick, right? When a person offended, we said to ourselves, God save me from being angry, thy will be done, right? I'm not praying for anybody but myself. I can't be angry. It tells me when I'm angry, I shut myself off from the sunlight of the spirit, and the insanity of alcohol returns, and with us to drink is to die. And my experience is, and you guys probably experienced it, when I get resentful and I don't write inventory and I go to pray, there is no connection there, right? I'm praying while thinking about this asshole, you know what I'm saying? You know? And it gets into this fourth column, which was everything for me in the beginning, you know, it was the fourth column of, it says, and I'm going to talk about this promise afterwards, but the fourth column says, where were we selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened, you know? So I'm not looking at my part, but I'm looking at, you know, my mistakes, right? And I'm seeing where I was selfish, dishonest, and I wish I had my first inventory so I could read you a piece of that, you know? It was probably insane. There was a lot going on in the fourth column, you know? Punched him in the face, stole his girlfriend, robbed his house, kicked his cat, punched his mom, you know? Like, there was probably a lot going on there, you know? But, you know, I remember writing this inventory out. I had like 56 resentments on my first inventory. And I was writing the 4-column inventory out, and I still did not see any truth in it, you know? I still did not see. It wasn't until I sat down and did this fifth step that I seen any truth. It shows how insane we are, where I'm writing out a 4-column inventory and I'm still the victim after the 4th column, you know? But, you know, and through reading this, there's an awesome thing at the end of it, right? It says, we admitted our wrongs honestly, and we're willing to set these matters straight, right? And that's the cool thing. When I read it, a sponsee called me the other day, a serious resentment. We kind of talked through the columns over the phone, and at the end of it, what his response was, how should I make this amends? You know, and that's the cool thing. You know, once I see the truth in this, I'm not thinking anything about what they did or what happened. I'm thinking about how can I make this right. You know, I didn't understand that my 4th step was going to switch around into my 9th step. You know, I probably would have put less names if that was the case, because my fucking amends process was extravagant, you know, extravagant. I had some serious amends. But I want to read a piece of inventory real quick that I wrote currently and show you what 9 years of sober looks like. Where is it? So the and just to give you an idea on how I write it out, and it is not showing up. Okay, it's gone. So I guess I'm not reading you a resentment inventory. I do not need to put inventory current experience. It was there. It was there, guys. And now it disappeared. But I wrote it the other day. It was a resentment towards my boss, and I'm an elevator mechanic, and this guy's untreated alcoholic, 2 years sober, never worked a step in his life. Yeah, and he screams all the time, screams at me, you know? So the first column was his name, second column is every time I walk into work, this guy's screaming at me, you know? And I wrote out the third column, how it affects me. You know, my ambitions, it was, I expect, you know, I want him not to scream at me, you know? And Mark Houston talks about it all the time, right? Like, you know, I write scripts for everybody, but I don't give them the script, you know? And then when they don't follow the script I wrote for them that I didn't give them, I'm disturbed, you know? I never sat this guy down and talked to him and say, I don't like the way you talk to me. I'm just showing up every day getting angry, right? You know? My security, I need him to stop yelling to be okay, right? And that's how I like to take a look at how, you know, the third column is really showing me my demands, my expectations, which is why I get resentful in the first place. You know, if I call my sponsor to do a 10-step, you know, what's wrong? The show didn't go off very well, you know? I can't get resentful if I don't have an expectation. That's the root of all my expectations. I want you to act a certain way. I want you to be a normal person when you're not, you know? And I was writing out the fourth column, and it's selfish. I barely work. One of the main reasons why he was screaming at me is because I'm a lazy piece of shit. You know? Like, I'm sitting around, he's like, what is this guy doing? Like, go clean something, go do something, you know? And I'm sitting there on my ass, you know, being lazy. And he's screaming at me because I'm being lazy. And I can't see where, you know, I'm being lazy. I'm just blaming him. He's an untreated alcoholic. That's the truth too. But this is how I operate when 9 years sober. This is the truth about my experiences. After a time, I can't differentiate the truth from the false. I need the inventory process to keep me awake and stop believing the lie. You know, and then I got into this fear stuff. I wish I had my first fears inventory too. I was scared of everything. I didn't know I was, you know, but I was operating out of fear everywhere I go, right? The book talks about it as the evil and corroding thread, right? The fabric of our existence was shot through. And what it is, right? It said it set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve, you know? So it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, I used to have the fear of losing people because I found my brother dead. I lost a lot of people growing up. You know, I used to lose a lot of people, and I had the fear of losing people. So what I started to do to fix the fear, right, self-reliance, is I started pushing everybody away, you know? And in the end, I'm fucking alone, you know? You know, I had this financial insecurity. This was like a year ago. I had financial insecurity. So the way I was going to fix this is let me gamble, you know? And then I ended up with a lot less money than I had prior. But this is, and you know, I got guys that, you know, are in such fear of their girlfriends cheating, and what they do is they go out and accuse her of cheating until she goes out and cheats. I've seen it over and over and over again, you know, and it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. And really what fear is in the whole thing is just self-reliance in the first place, you know. I wouldn't have the fear if I wasn't relying on myself. You know, so for me, it's not always a negative thing. Sometimes it's kind of like an alarm that goes off in my life. Like, Joe, look here. Let's bring this to God. Let's bring this to prayer. You're relying on yourself in this area. You know, and the cool thing about the fears inventory is that, you know, I challenge people to try this, to write a fears inventory as you're going through the process, and then go back to that fears inventory in 2 months and try to write it again. You're not going to have the same fears on there. You know, the fears we start to outgrow fear. You know, as I start to rely on God and remove the stuff that's blocking me, the fears start to disappear from me, you know. But they come back, and then, you know, it's a process. This is not about not getting disturbed. This is about what do I do when I get disturbed, right? And that's what it is for me. You know, my sex inventory was just a bunch of different names, a bunch of different names, the same harm, you know. What happened, it was all about me. It just showed me how self-centered I was, right? I'm just going to do whatever I need to do, tell you whatever I need to tell you to get what I want. And then when I get what I want, I'm gone, you know? And I didn't see any of the truth in that, you know? But it says, it starts talking about an overhauling, right? And if you ever do an overhauling on your car, you turn your car off, right? And then whatever, you take it apart, right? So what that's telling me here is if I'm in a relationship, park. Okay. If I'm in a relationship, stay put, right? If I'm not in a relationship, the book's telling me an overhauling, stay put, you know? The book also says, I don't want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. I'm not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't do, what relationship you shouldn't get in. The other speaker was talking about that, right? I don't know what you need for your life. That's a big thing in my sponsor lineage is I don't know what you need, you know? In the 11th step, it says, we don't pray for our own selfish ends, right? Why? Many of us have wasted a lot of time doing that. Why? Because I don't know what I need. And if I don't know what I need, I sure as fuck don't know what you need, bud, you know? It's the reality. When guys come to me and ask me questions and ask me for advice, I ask them, what do you feel, right? First of all, if you're coming to me with a question, the answer, you probably have the answer in you, right? The answers for you are in you. Look there, you know? But I could help you pull the answer, right? Because there's a power in you that's telling you, we just need to pull it out of you, right? I don't know what you need. You know, and that's been my experience. You know, I wrote this whole sex inventory out. I love the last question. It says, what should you have done instead? Not what could you have done instead, right? I had no power, right? But when we get to the 11th step inventory, there's a question, what could I have done instead? Because now I have power in my life. I have power to be different. I have access to power to show up different. The big thing, you know, I remember going to jail over and over and over again, hurting everybody in my life. And I felt like I was a good person, but I was just never able to be it. You know, I would go to jail and I'd be like, oh, you guys got the wrong person, man. You know, like I feel like I'm a good boy. Like I care about people. I have a huge heart. I just could not live up to it, you know. One of the greatest things in my life today is being able to live up to that, you know. My first fifth step was one of probably the most powerful experiences ever. You know, I went to Dano's house. I read him the inventory. I really don't even remember what happened. I remember him lighting sage and walking around the apartment. And I'm like, I don't know what this fucking guy's doing. I just want to get this over with, you know? But I read him the whole inventory down that I had down on paper. He said something when I left his house. He said, did you leave anything out? And I said, no, I told you everything. He said something that saved my life. He said, if you left anything out, leave a message on my answering machine. I never heard anybody say that. I never heard anybody say that in a meeting after that experience. I tell my guys that all the time. If he didn't tell me that, I would have held on to the stuff I was not going to tell him, and I would have drank again and I would have used. But I went to sit for the hour of meditation. I was in like some street corner in LA, and I was sitting there with my big book, and I was doing the meditation, following the directions, and the thought came to my mind that if I didn't tell this guy everything, I was going to drink again. You know, and I called him on the phone. I left this long-ass message on my answer machine that I hope he deleted. There was some shameful stuff on there, all right? You know, but when I hung up the phone, I started to cry, and I began to have a spiritual experience where I felt the presence of God. You know, the fifth step promises talk about you may have spiritual beliefs, but you'll begin to have a spiritual experience. You know, I talk about it all the time. I'm sitting in this hour of meditation, and here I am. I don't believe in God, but here I am having an experience with God. But the truth is, it wasn't that I didn't believe. It was that the experience was so different than the belief that it felt like I didn't believe my whole life. You know, like it was a sensory experience that I felt. I felt power flow in, right? The book talks about it as a power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction that flows into us. It was the sensory. I felt it. You know, I feel like we take a lot of time in 12-step recovery chasing concepts. You know, when with the experiences right in front of us. You know, I remember waking up not wanting to blow my head off anymore. That's the power we call God, right? You know, I remember being, you know, thinking about others and showing up the way I wanted to, and just, you know, having experiences like when I'm asking God questions and I'm getting answers. You know, and I'm going to close with this. You know, there's a line in the sex inventory where it says we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about this specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it enough. You know, and I took that literally. You know, I had this option one time to take 2 jobs, and I didn't know what to do. And my sponsor's like, "Are you just going to self-will your life?" You know, because we say in 12-step recovery, the next right thing, or God's will, is to do the next right thing. You know, but what happens when I have a bunch of next right things? What am I going to do? Self-will it? You know? So he said, "Why don't you ask God a question?" And I said, "Well, that's weird. I never thought of that." You know. And I said this prayer. I said, "God, please show me what job to take." And one was doing smart system programming, and one was doing being a foreman. I had no experience in either. And I said that prayer. I went to a meeting about 2 hours after I said that prayer. And before I walked in the door of that meeting, a guy walked up to me and he said, "You know what you should do for work? You should do smart system programming." I swear to God. I swear to God. And I've had it insane. And I've had these kind of experiences over and over and over in 12 step in this, you know. I've went to make amends in other states, and I'm saying a prayer, God, please show me who to make amends to, and all of a sudden this kid's name pops in my mind, and I try calling him, and I haven't seen him in years, and he doesn't answer, and I walk in a meeting, and there he is standing in the meeting, you know? I had this one, my ex-girlfriend kept popping up in my mind, and I haven't talked to her in 3 years. I said that prayer, God, please show me what amends to make. And a couple of days later, she called me and asked me to invite her to her sister's wedding where I could make it an amends to her mom, her sister's husband. Like, this is the stuff that happens here. You know, there is a power that you can access, that you could get connected to, that will change your life, that you can contact. You know, and one of the questions before someone asked was like, I forgot what the question was, but it was something about like, how do you know when God's doing? I forgot what it is, but it's when I start experiencing it that I start trusting. You know, it's that when I start experiencing this power show up in my life over and over and over again, then I get this trust and I know it's there. You know, the book talks about the power just as much as the feeling we have for a friend when it talks about God. It's like you always have this thing walking with you, no matter where you go. I'm Joe, I'm an alcoholic. Thank you, guys.